are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to this special edition of the Way to Wow shows. I'm your host, Kevin Bemel, and today, June 22nd, 2025, we're marking the anniversary of the adoption of the Pledge of Allegiance. So this is perhaps a bit of an anachronism for contemporary times, but when I was in school, in grade school especially, we started out every school day by putting our hand over our heart and pledging allegiance to the flag. The same was true at Cub Scout pack meetings and Boy Scout troop meetings. In the U.S. military, there were various meetings where we said the Pledge of Allegiance, and I'm trying to think of, there was somewhere in my civilian life where the Pledge of Allegiance is still said at the beginning of a meeting. So it's been controversial over the last 3 decades or so. I think that's unfortunate. I think it's a good thing for us to express allegiance to our country. Just because we express allegiance doesn't mean we agree with everything our country, our elected officials and appointed officials choose to do on our country's behalf, nor does it mean that we approve of everything our country has done in the past. But it does mean that we stand together as a people, and that we cherish its values and the unity that we can gain from them. And so that's why I chose to do this special edition. I think I started these about a year ago. I didn't do a show on this topic last year, but I will be including it from now on. So this is the 77th anniversary of the adoption of the Pledge of Allegiance. I'll talk about that a little in a few minutes. The Pledge of Allegiance was originally written in 1892 by Francis Bellamy, who was a Baptist minister and, interestingly enough, a Christian socialist. So we tend to think of socialism as being anti-American. A Christian socialist, that has also somehow come to be something pejorative. I don't think either one of them needs to be per se, but in any event, Francis Bellamy wrote the original pledge as for a campaign celebrating again, interestingly, the 400th anniversary of Columbus's arrival in the Americas. So if you remember the old phrase, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. So 400 years later, Francis Bellamy originally wrote the pledge in order to honor the anniversary of that event. It was published in the Youth's Companion. This was a popular children's magazine of the time, on September 8th, 1892, as part of a public school celebration of Columbus Day. If you saw my Columbus Day show, that also has been tinged with controversy, unfortunately. So the original text was shorter and simpler than the pledge that we say today. And the original text was, "I pledge allegiance to my flag and the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all." I think a lovely sentiment, and hopefully one that, we all could agree on. And certainly I think people of the time, the vast majority, I think, agreed with that sentiment. On October 12th of 1892, that was the first recitation, sort of official recitation of the pledge, and it was recited in public schools during Columbus Day celebrations that were organized by the National Education Association. And it was accompanied by what's called the Bellamy Salute. Originally, students recited the pledge with an arm outstretched toward the flag. Now, I'm not going to do it because the gesture has since then become associated with the Nazi Party. This is not to exculpate the Nazis. The salute they used had been used for millennia, all the way back to Rome, certainly as a way of saluting. But in any event, the Nazis didn't exist when Francis Bellamy, adopted what's come to be called the Bellamy Salute in pledging allegiance to the flag. So since then, over the 130 some odd years since the pledge was first recited, there have been modifications. The first one took place in 1923, and the phrase "my flag" was replaced by the flag of the United States. And this was to ensure that the loyalty was to the United States flag specifically, as opposed to a flag from an immigrant's home country, or not home country, prior country, I should say. So it was to clarify that they were pledging allegiance to the flag of the United States as opposed to some other flag. In 1924, the next year, this was further clarified to be the flag of the United States of America. Okay, it was pretty well known or understood back then that the United States referred to the United States of America, but just in the effort, in an effort to be clear, that was they added "of America." I think that was a good addition. It's always a good thing to be clear, right? And then on June 22nd, 1942, 77 years ago, Congress officially recognized the Pledge of Allegiance and made it part of the U.S. flag code, which is how the flag is treated, including how it's flown, how it's retired, how a flag is destroyed when it's no longer serviceable. So all of those are contained in the U.S. flag code. And this was, if you recognize the date, June 22nd, 1942, the United States had entered World War II just about 6 months before that. Pearl Harbor was December 7th, 1941. So the United States officially entered World War II on December 8th, 1941. So it was about 6 months later. There was some, patriotic fervor in the country at that time, to be sure. And in 1942, the salute was also changed. So instead of doing the so-called Bellamy Salute, which by then was associated with the Nazi Party and Nazi Germany, so it was replaced by putting the right hand over the heart. Now, I will add, by the way, that when people in uniform say the pledge, they keep their cover on, their hat on. But when civilians say it, so for example, I don't know if it's still said at sporting events. It was when I used to go to sporting events, football games, baseball games, etc. So as a civilian, you would take your hat off, and I would always hold my hat over my heart. I don't know if that was right or wrong, but that's what I used to do. And so now we hold our right hand over our heart, as opposed to doing the Bellamy Salute. And that also happened in 1942. In 1954, the words "under God" were added to the pledge. And this was in response to the Cold War and the anti-communist sentiment that was very prevalent in the 1950s and 60s. I don't think we can quite appreciate just how unified Americans were in general against communism. and Soviet Russia as the embodiment of it. It doesn't seem like that was the case today, but it certainly was in the 50s and 60s. And um, communism was often referred to as godless communism because the communists specifically rejected God, and so under God was added to the pledge. This was when President Eisenhower was in office, and Congress, influenced by lobbying groups, most notably the Knights of Columbus, added the phrase "under God" in order to distinguish the United States from the atheistic Soviet Union. Now, that has become really the most controversial aspect of the Pledge of Allegiance, and there have been Supreme Court challenges to it. Many atheists in the United States are um, offended by the words "under God" being in the pledge. In 1963, in a case called School District of Abington Township versus Shemp, which was also related to school prayer, the Supreme Court upheld the idea that recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance was voluntary. Students could not be forced to recite the pledge. Now, interestingly enough, this case was decided shortly after I was born, 3 years after I was born. When I was in school, I said the Pledge of Allegiance. Now, I would have volunteered had I known, that even if I knew I didn't have to say it, I certainly would have said it for the reasons I mentioned earlier in this. In 1988, President Ronald Reagan endorsed an amendment to the Constitution to protect the words "under God" in the pledge. That endorsement never materialized into a change in the Constitution. Right? And then in 2002, the Ninth Circuit Court, Federal Circuit Court, which is the Federal Circuit Court covering California and kind of the western part of the United States, in a case called Newdow versus the United States Congress, found the phrase was unconstitutional in public schools. And so Newdow was an atheist, and of course he was trying to get it removed from the pledge. 2 years later, in 2004, the Supreme Court reversed that decision on procedural grounds, meaning that the court dismissed the Newdow case because they determined that Newdow did not have standing in order to bring the case to begin with. However, this court did not rule on the merits of whether it was constitutional or not for "under God" to stay in the Pledge of Allegiance. And that's where sort of Pledge of Allegiance jurisprudence stands to this day. It remains, especially the "under God" phrase, remains controversial. People who are against it assert that this is an establishment of religion, which violates the First Amendment. People who are in favor of it say God is not religion. Religion is the way that people choose to worship God, but God stands outside of religion. And God was mentioned in the Declaration of Independence, and therefore is acknowledged as the deity under whose grace the United States exists. Like I said, I believe it remains controversial to this day. But as you know, I'm a religious Jew, and so for me, I find no controversy in pledging "under God." So the Pledge of Allegiance, there are many public schools that still say the Pledge of Allegiance. It's also said at civic events. Some states allow students to opt out, but it remains, I think, a fairly broad practice. So The recitation is voluntary in accord with the 1963 Supreme Court ruling. Neither students nor adults can be compelled to say the pledge. However, it really remains a seminal practice in um, um, asserting a love of country and patriotism in the best sense of the word. Um, the controversy spins on, but I think the pledge has endured. It has been translated into non-English languages for people who don't speak English, and so that they can recite it. And new citizens to the United States do recite the pledge as part of their naturalization ceremony. So I think it's notable that indeed this practice continues, and newly minted citizens do say the pledge. So if you're watching this show and you care to join me, I'm going to recite the Pledge of Allegiance in honor of the anniversary of its adoption on June 22nd, 1942. So I'll place my right hand over my heart. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So that's my kind of brief special edition of the Way to Wow show in honor of the anniversary of the adoption of the Pledge of Allegiance. I hope you'll fly your American flag today in honor of this event, and in fact that you'll fly the flag in honor of all federal holidays as a sign of unity with our fellow Americans. And I wish you a meaningful day, and I thank you very much for joining me. Signing off as I always do, my dear Marie, who was a proud American. And Marie, you are my belle. Courage at all times, my friends.